In 1991, a researcher at Iowa State University named Dr. Nick Christians filed a patent. Not for a chemical, for a powder. A byproduct of milling corn that costs about $2 a pound and stops weed seeds from ever taking root. He found it by accident, and the herbicide industry spent the next 30 years making sure it stayed buried in academic journals instead of sitting on your shelf. I've used it on lawns all over North Texas. No spray rig, no refills, no 2.4D. Just a powder you can grab at a feed store. Stay with me, because at the end, I'll tell you the exact week to put it down. And it's not a date on the calendar. It's a signal your own yard gives you. Let me tell you who Dr. Nick Christians is, because this is where it starts. He's a turf scientist at Iowa State University. Not a salesman, not a guru. A researcher in a university lab. And back in the late 1980s, he wasn't even studying weeds. He was studying a fungus, a turf disease, and the fungus he was working with happened to be grown on cornmeal. So he spread that cornmeal on test soil to run his disease work. And he noticed something he wasn't looking for. The grass seed in those treated plots wouldn't root. It would sprout. Then it would just stop. Wither and die before it ever caught hold. Most people would have thrown out the batch and moved on. He didn't. He chased it. And what he figured out was that it wasn't the fungus doing the work. It was the cornmeal itself. By 1991, he'd filed a use patent for corn gluten meal as a natural pre-emergent herbicide. Documented, published. Sitting in the patent office and in the turf science journals, where anybody could read it. Here's the thing. That research never made it to your shelf. It made it into Iowa State Extension bulletins. It made it into peer-reviewed turf journals that nobody outside a county extension office ever opens. And it stayed there. For 30 years. Why? Because the synthetic herbicide industry had no reason to carry it forward, and every reason to leave it buried. You can't put a corporate brand on a milling byproduct that sells for $2 a pound at the feed store. There's no franchise in it. So while that science sat in academic journals, homeowners kept doing what the herbicide aisle trained them to do. Buying the $40 bag of synthetic pre-emergent every March. Dragging out the spray rig. Mixing 2.4D and walking it across the yard every spring, year after year after year. 30 seasons of money and chemical exposure for a result a $2 pantry powder could have handled. That's the cost of knowledge staying in a journal instead of on your shelf. And that's where we start, so let's name it. The powder is corn gluten meal. Folks in the trade just call it CGM. It's a byproduct of wet milling corn. When they process corn for starch and syrup, this is what's left over from the protein fraction. It's a soft, gritty, yellow-gold powder. Runs about 60% protein. And you can buy it at any feed store or farm supply for right around $2 a pound. It's been sitting at the feed store the whole time. It's livestock feed. That's the cover it's been hiding under. And here's a bonus most people don't catch. Corn gluten meal is roughly 9 to 10% nitrogen. So on a fertilizer label, it reads about a 900. That means the same powder that stops weed seeds is also feeding your lawn nitrogen at the same time. One product, two jobs. Now ask yourself why you've never seen that on an end cap display next to the prodiamine. You haven't because there's no money in pointing you toward a generic feed store powder. It stayed in the academic literature for exactly that reason. Now here's where it gets interesting. How does a food product stop a weed? Let's walk through it together. Inside corn gluten meal, there are compounds called dipeptides. Short little protein fragments. When a weed seed germinates, the very first thing it pushes out is a tiny root. Turf scientists call it the radicle. That's the seed's lifeline. It's how the sprout pulls in water before it can do anything else. What those dipeptides do is shut down that radical. The seed still sprouts. It still tries. But it can't form that feeder root. And a sprout with no root can't drink. So the first time the soil dries out, that little sprout desiccates and dies. It starves for water with the finish line in sight. Now here's the part that matters, and it's the part that makes this thing impossible to regulate away. It only works on seeds at the moment of germination. It does nothing to an established plant. Your Bermuda, your fescue, your zoysia, anything with a root system already built, doesn't even notice it. The dipeptides only catch a plant in that one vulnerable window, when it's reaching for its first root and hasn't got it yet. It's selective by life stage, not by chemistry. That's why nobody could ever ban it or pull it off the market. You can't outlaw a livestock feed. It's a food. It works through a natural protein doing what proteins do. There's no boogeyman chemical to point at. And that's precisely why it never got the spotlight a patented synthetic gets. There's nothing to scare people away from, and nothing to sell them on either. So how do you actually put it down? This is where it stops feeling like chemistry and starts feeling like freedom. You broadcast it dry, with a spreader, about 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet. That's it. No spray rig, no mixing jug. No calibrating a backpack sprayer. No respirator, no goggles, no nitrile gloves. And you all know I never spray without that gear on. With corn gluten, I don't need it. It's a powder. You load the hopper, you walk it across the lawn the same way you'd walk fertilizer, and you're done. No tank to refill halfway across the yard. No leftover concentrate to store in the garage. And the results hold up. Christian's own research showed roughly 60% weed reduction in the first season. That climbs. Use it again the next spring, and the next, and you're looking at 80% or better by year 3. At the same time, it's dropping that nitrogen, so your lawn greens up while your weeds thin out. Most homeowners get this backwards. They think you have to choose between feeding the lawn and fighting the weeds. Here, you're doing both with one pass of one cheap powder. 60% the first year, 80+ by year 3, and a free green up on top. You'd think that'd be on every shelf in America. It's on almost none of them. There's no margin in telling you that. Now stay with me, because there's a layer underneath this that even folks who've heard of corn gluten get wrong. And I learned it the hard way. Back around 2015, I read Dr. Christian's work, and I ran my own test. I put corn gluten on a customer's lawn here in North Texas, and I ran it 3 seasons straight to see what it really did. And the first thing I learned is that this powder has a window. It needs water to activate. An initial watering or a rain to wake those dipeptides up and get them working at the soil surface. But then it needs a dry down. It needs a dry spell so those rootless sprouts actually desiccate and die. And here's the trap. If you get a long, wet, rainy stretch right after you put it down, those sprouts that should have died get enough moisture to recover and push a root anyway. The whole thing softens. That's not the powder failing. That's the weather, and that's timing. Most people who tell you corn gluten doesn't work just hit a wet spring and never knew the difference. There's a hard rule that goes with this, and you cannot break it. Never, and I mean never, put corn gluten down the same season you overseed. Think about what it does. It stops seeds from rooting. It does not know the difference between a crabgrass seed and your good grass seed. None. If you spread it and then throw down fescue seed, you just killed your own lawn before it sprouted. So in your overseeding year, corn gluten sits in the garage. That's it. That's the one trade-off, and it's a real one. But here's the long game, the payoff that makes this whole thing worth doing. It's not just this season's weeds. Every weed seed that germinates and dies because it couldn't root is a seed that is gone from your soil forever. That's the seed bank, the reservoir of dormant weed seeds, sitting in your dirt waiting for their shot. Most homeowners spend their whole lives feeding that seed bank by pulling weeds and disturbing soil. Corn gluten does the opposite. It draws the seed bank down year over year by killing the next generation before it can ever resupply itself. That's why year 3 is so much better than year 1. You're not just treating weeds. You're emptying the well they come from. And nobody selling you an annual bag of synthetic pre-emergent has any interest in you emptying that well, because an empty well means you stop buying. Now, before we keep going, I want to tell you about something. Corn gluten works because it hits the weed at the seed stage, and understanding that seed bank is the whole game. If you're exhausted by the cycle of pulling and spraying every weekend, and you want a permanent fix instead of one more tip, I put the entire system in writing. It's called Larry's 30-Day Weed Kill Protocol, and it's $17 at larrysgardenbooks.com. Chapter 2 walks through the seed bank and the exact germination triggers that make corn gluten work, the biology behind why prevention beats pulling. If you're watching on your TV, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. Take your time finding it. I'll be right here. If you're on a phone or laptop, the link's in the description. So if this powder is real, cheap, and proven, the obvious question is why it never made it to the shelf next to the bottles of synthetic killer. Here's the answer, and it's not complicated. Dr. Christian's use patent expired around 2011. The moment it expired, corn gluten meal landed in the public domain. No company can own it. Nobody can brand it as theirs alone. Nobody can build a repeat purchase franchise on a product that any feed store can sell by the bag. Now compare that to the synthetics. Proteamine, pendimethalin. Those are patentable molecules. They're brandable. They're profitable. They sit inside a herbicide market worth around $40 billion a year. And that market runs on one thing: you coming back next spring to buy another bag. There is no margin in a $2 generic powder, so it never got the marketing budget. It never got the shelf space. It stayed in turf science journals and extension bulletins, exactly where most homeowners would never look. Now I want to be honest with you, because this audience is too smart for a one-sided pitch. Corn gluten is not a magic bullet. It needs a higher application rate than the synthetics, that 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And it needs precise timing. The skeptics are right that if you mistime it, it underperforms. A synthetic pre-emergent is more forgiving of a sloppy calendar. But here's the thing. Precision closes that gap completely. Get the timing right, and corn gluten matches the synthetics season after season. The chemical companies were never wrong that their products work. They just had every reason in the world to make sure you never heard about the $2 alternative that does the same job. And think about what that cost you. Years of $40 bags. The spray rig in the garage. The 2.4D you breathed in every spring. The weekends you lost. All for a result a Pantry powder could have handed you. Which brings me to the one thing that decides whether this works or fails. The timing I promised you at the start, and I told you it's not a date on the calendar. It's a signal your own yard gives you. Here it is. When the forsythia blooms in your area, those bright yellow shrubs that flower before almost anything else in spring, that's your signal. Forsythia bloom lines up almost perfectly with soil temperature hitting 55 degrees. And 55 degrees is the exact threshold where crabgrass and the other summer annual seeds wake up and start to germinate. So your corn gluten has to be down on the soil just before that bloom, so those dipeptides are active and waiting the moment those seeds try to push out a root. This is why a calendar date fails you. Spring doesn't arrive the same week every year. One year it's early March, the next it's April. If you spread your powder on March 15th because that's what some bag told you, you might be 2 weeks early or 2 weeks late. And late means the seed's already rooted. Watch the forsythia instead. And if you want to confirm it, Push a soil temperature probe an inch or two down and read it yourself. I learned this the hard way back around 2015, testing corn gluten on a customer's lawn 3 seasons running. The years I guessed the date, it barely moved the needle. The year I timed it to the bloom and the soil temp, it cut the crabgrass dramatically. Timing is everything. Before I let you go, you've now got the powder and you've got the timing signal, and that puts you ahead of 90% of homeowners. But corn gluten is one move in a season-long calendar. There's a right time for every weed prevention step across the whole year, and that's exactly what Chapter 9 of the book lays out. The no-weed garden, year-round, every move mapped to its season. It's the complete chemical-free system for folks who want to end the cycle for good, not just chase another tip. The whole thing is $17 at larrysgardenbooks.com. If you're on your phone or laptop right now, the link is sitting in the description below. If you're parked in front of the TV, point your phone camera at the QR code on the screen. And no rush, take a moment to dig it out of your pocket first. I'll wait right here while you get it pulled up. All right, here's the takeaway. A $2 bag of corn gluten meal, spread at 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet, just before the forsythia blooms, stops weed seeds from ever rooting. No spray rig, no refills, no 2,4-D. Now you know what that whole herbicide aisle was built to keep quiet. Next time I'll show you how the same feed store shelf hides a natural nitrogen source that greens a lawn deeper than any synthetic bag. Another one they'd rather you walked right past. Go watch your forsythia. You'll see exactly what I mean. I'll see you in the next one.